Welcome to the WoW podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories and insights from our university community. Tune in for conversations about growth, success, and the power of communication in the academic world. So get ready to soar with us on the wings of wisdom.
All right. Welcome to a new episode of the Wings of Wisdom WoW podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mohsin Bensed, and today I have a new co-host joining me on this episode, the legendary and the incredible super student Zeb Westrick. How's it going, Zeb?
It's going really good, really good. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for being on the show. Would you like to introduce our guest today?
Absolutely. Just come over here. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest, a man of many talents and remarkable dedication to empowering others, with over 2 decades of experience spanning coaching, teaching, operations, and broadcast media. Our guest has honed a unique ability to inspire, mentor, and lead. Currently a life-calling career coach at Ashland University and a seasoned play-by-play broadcaster, his passion lies in helping individuals discover their purpose and guiding them toward success. Our guest has tremendous experience developing character in young athletes and crafting engaging sports broadcasts. He also brings energy, insight, and a commitment to excellence to every endeavor. We're excited to welcome Mr. Brandon Wells to the Wings of Wisdom podcast.
Brandon,
Thanks for coming
welcome.
on, Brandon.
Hey, thanks, Eb. That was a fantastic introduction. Thanks, Dr. Bensed. I'm glad to be here as your guest on this podcast. It's a fantastic thing to kind of get together and talk through all kinds of subjects and how we can help students here on campus.
Absolutely. And Brandon and I are part of the Leadership Ashland cohort of 2024, 2025?
Yeah, it's we're a couple months into Leadership Ashland here. It's run by the Chamber and John Swope and Amy Dobbins-Beck and folks, and it's been an interesting experience as somebody who's lived in Ashland for most of the last 20 years to still be learning things about the county and folks and services and people and leaders throughout the county. It's been an interesting experience so far, and we're about a third of the way through. So yeah, it's been great to get to know you as well a little bit more.
Wonderful, Brandon. Thank you. So usually we start with your time as an undergrad. If you could share with us any big moments or challenges that helped shape where you are today.
That's a good question. I went to Ohio University for undergrad, and coming out of high school, I kind of was fairly well set on going there. I had applied at a couple other schools thinking about maybe playing baseball, but it wasn't good enough to play at Ohio University, which is a major, it's a Division I college, and I wasn't good enough baseball player to play there, that's for sure. But they had a great journalism school, and that was why I decided to, why I applied there. And was fortunate enough to get in to the Scripps School of Journalism, and it's generally considered one of the best journalism schools in the country. For both broadcast and print, and a lot of famous broadcast journalists and writers have come out of there, and it was an interesting experience. I spent 4 years at Athens. While most people were like coming into town on Halloween at Athens, I usually was actually getting out of town because that was a little too crazy for me. But educationally, great journalism program, great liberal arts school, learned all kinds of things, but I think one of the things that I learned best was, how to interact with people from different races, different nationalities, different ethnicities, because OU was a bit of a melting pot. The broadcasting part was always good, and I did a lot of work, not necessarily while I was at OU, but at OU in their broadcast department. But I did a lot of work, really for Fox Sports and for folks like that during my 4 years at Ohio U. And I know it's a rambling answer. You ask a broadcaster a short question, you get a long answer, right?
That's great.
I also spent a semester abroad in Wales.
You did?
Yeah, Cardiff University in a Journalism Without Stereotypes program that was part of, Missouri University. University of Missouri was part of it, Boston University, and Ohio University. And there might have been one other, but I know that those are three just tremendous J schools. And so we had a really neat exchange program there.
It's wonderful. Zeb, have you been on any abroad trips, study abroad?
I never been on an abroad trip through Ashland University. I've been abroad a few times, kind of
Oh, yeah.
recreationally, for my own kind of enjoyment. Not really an educational experience totally, but I think kind of going off of what Brandon says, right? Like any trip abroad, you learn something super insightful or new, not only about where you are, but about yourself, right?
Right.
So just going off of what he's saying, yeah,
Yeah,
that's really interesting, Brandon. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, you're,
Like as I've been going through my own undergraduate experience at Ashland, right? I'm curious because I kind of have my own takeaways from like the educational experience, but one of the things I've really been concerned about, and I'd be really curious to get your opinion on this, is how has your education, especially in your undergraduate, when you were an undergraduate, affected kind of the average or practical living out of your life? Because I think it's hard for some people to like bridge kind of like this abstract or even just like lessons in writing, right? Like how does that apply in day-to-day life?
yeah, I mean, that's a great question as well, Zeb. I think from a day-to-day, I probably would struggle to answer that initially, but I think like a lot of college students, one of the biggest pieces of what I learned was how to live with folks, right? Like having three different roommates from different places and different religions and different backgrounds. And I made a lot of mistakes, to be fair, to be honest, looking back about just sort of how rigid I was, I think, at going in. And then I think years later, looking back, you start to see like, oh man, what a jerk I was at times to people. I think from an educational standpoint, I think I got such a well-rounded education there. Whether it was things in from history. I was a history minor, and I was able to take various classes that from history of baseball, because there was one of the higher ups in the Society of American Baseball Research was the head of the history department at Ohio U at the time, Dr. Charles Alexander, and he was a fabulous professor. And he, for somebody who loved baseball, he made it come to life even more. But then I also took some independent studies on the history of the Negro Leagues, which was really neat as well, history of the Greek games. All of those things helped me become a better broadcaster. The knowledge, some of the wisdom, and some of those things that gave context to everything that I was, interested in. And so I think that was probably the biggest thing that I would take away from that, because, what you would learn at Ashland University in the journalism digital media program versus what you would learn at a Syracuse, at an OU, at a Kent, they're all going to be very similar practices. So it all comes down to kind of how you connect with people. And at the time, I spent so much time working in the field on the broadcast production side during college that I didn't get as involved in the production and in the on-air stuff at OU while I was there. And so that kind of hurt me, actually, to be honest. It was a short-term gain, but I look at my long-term goals because I didn't know how to get from A to B. And so I think, one of the reasons I like doing what I'm doing here at Ashland and helping students figure out career paths and how to get the next step in their career path and their journey is because I don't feel like I had anybody helping me with that at Ohio U at the time. I'm sure there was people there that did it, but they, for me, I just wasn't aware of it.
Right. I think that goes with a lot of the services that are kind of not really hidden to students, but for whatever reason, we don't really know about them.
Yeah.
At that moment until you really need them so much. Then I remember my time as an undergrad and all the orientations that I had to attend, and I was just there. I don't really remember any of it.
Yeah.
But until you feel like you really need the service, then maybe you might seek it out. But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, I think that we hear that a lot from students who do come to see us in the Career Center, and they say, some of them will come in and because they're either required to for a class, or some of them will come in because they're just not sure what to do with their lives or their major or their career, and some will come in and walk away going, oh my gosh, that was so helpful. And I think others still walk away going, well, I checked that box. And so it's sort of, it's really up to the student. And the way we approach it here is, it's a brain-based model. And I'm sure maybe you're going to ask some things about that, but like we use this brain-based cognitive development model that really, the theory is based on the fact that, number one, the human brain really can only process about 30 minutes of information at a time before it's chunked, and after that, it's such a diminishing return so quickly after 30 minutes that we try to just say, okay, let's do some action steps that we can give you that are concrete action steps walking away from this 30-minute appointment, and if we need more, let's schedule another appointment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Science.
Yeah, there you go.
Right, and I think that leads us off into kind of like this next more specific question, which is like, what is the journey for you, Brandon, from your undergrad, maybe on to higher ed, and then to Ashland University in particular as a place of employment? Where are the steps? How did you get here?
Boy, that's a question. When I finished at Ohio U, I sort of felt like I wanted to do something more impactful. At least that's what I thought, and my sort of approach was I wanted to do something more impactful than talking about sports, right? And so I went into teaching, not as an ed major. I wasn't a certified or licensed teacher, but I started looking for private schools that might be looking for somebody to teach English, because as a journalism major, and as a decent writer and a decent student, when it came to all of those things, I felt like, hey, I wanted to coach and I wanted to teach. So I found a private school up in Ashtabula, Grand River Academy, which is a boys boarding school that was looking for an English teacher and a basketball coach. And as somebody who absolutely loves basketball and loves coaching basketball, this was an opportunity to go, get out of my parents' house, find a job there. And so I went there kind of thinking I was going to be the next, I don't know, Phil Jackson, Rick Pitino, something, whatever you think about them. If you know basketball, I just love basketball. So that's what I thought was going to happen. And so I spent a year there teaching grammar, teaching English. What an experience it was to live. Part of that job was to live in the dorms with students, and so you had an apartment that came as part of your benefits package. Now, you didn't get paid as much but you had a lot of non-taxed benefits like that, and food and all that. It was kind of a neat arrangement as a 23-year-old single guy. And you were on duty once a month, one weekend a month, and then once a week, where you had to make sure that people were studying and doing all their things. And then you're coaching basketball. So I went from there. I went to another school. I was at a few schools for a while, really for about 7-8 years. I taught and coached. Before we moved to Ashland, and when we moved to Ashland, it was because my wife, Sarah, who worked here at AU, she took a job at AU as the administrative director for the creative writing program, the MFA program here. That's what led us back down here. And to be honest, it really was more financial than anything, although it was kind of it was a great job for her. But she got offered the job here, and it made more money than her and I were making combined at a private Christian school. And so that was really the main impetus for us driving us back here. And she was a creative writing major here at AU in undergrad. So that's how we ended up back here.
Very good.
The first time, I should say. Yeah.
Right, and then getting a master's in applied theology. That's pretty unique. And how has that shaped how you teach, coach, or even approach broadcasting?
It has impacted me in the way I approach everyone. I started that program about 2 years after we moved back to Ashland. I started the master's program, and I thought this was at Ashland Theological Seminary here, which is a branch of AU, obviously. But I thought I was going to be a lead pastor because I just kept thinking, I kept feeling like this spirit moving, telling me, hey, you should go do this, right? And I went there, and I was there for a year, I didn't finish. But the biggest thing, I have finished since, and I'll get to that, but the biggest thing I learned was about identity, right? And I think, and this is something I share with students so often, and even with other, peers and folks above me, is that, my identity isn't in a job, right? It isn't in what I get to do, whether that was as a basketball coach, whether that's as a broadcaster, whether that's as a life calling career coach, and for you as a student and as a professor and as the director of the writing center, like that doesn't define who we are. So, it's a piece of what we get to do, but those things can be taken away at any time, right? Whether it's cutbacks or we just, something happens to our health or whatever happens, those things can go away at any time. And so I think the biggest thing I learned at seminary that first time through, when I didn't finish, was that our identity is not wrapped up in those things. And for me, it's as a child of God and as somebody who's supposed to love people and whatever that looks like. And so when students come into my office and how I'm trying to help them, often I'm trying to get that message through to them as well. It's like, hey, regardless of what you get to do, those are things that you get to do. And a lot of times, especially with student athletes, half of our population here at Ashland University, more than half now, are student athletes. And I have that hard conversation sometimes with them or potential recruits to say, at some point, golf's over, basketball's over, football's over, and then what, right? Because you're no longer, Jim the football player or Sarah the basketball player. What are you?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Wow. I think, especially for younger folks, those small setbacks sometimes seem like the end of life or the end of the world. That's a really nice perspective to kind of stress with our students.
Yeah, I think when I thought I was going to be a pastor when I went to seminary the first time, and I think in some ways, I am pastoring people, right? I in many ways, coaching and pastoring are kind of the same thing, right? I mean, it just depends on whether or not you're talking about sports, life. Those are all sort of analogous to each other, right? So I think that's the way I approach it. At least I try to. Yeah, and I ended up back at seminary. Part of that journey. You asked me the question, right? And again, I'm long-winded, I know. We came back to Ashland. We were here for 7 years. We came to Ashland. We were here for 7 years. I did some broadcasting. I did some coaching. I worked for ESPN for a stint, and then we moved to Copley, and I was still working for ESPN. My wife took a job at Case in their business school in the marketing department, helping run their marketing for the Weatherhead School of Management, which is a world-renowned program. And I had to get off the road. Working for ESPN, I wanted to, I needed to stay married. I wanted to stay married and see my kids. So I quit my job there and started doing some local stuff. And then a few years later, Sarah had an opportunity, my wife, to come back down here to work for a private marketing company here in town. We came back here. Our community is here. I worked at the Kroc Center. I worked at Park Street for a spell as well there as the worship coordinator, and then worked at the Kroc Center here in town, which there's only 26 Kroc Centers in the whole country. That's a whole nother story, but I worked there as the director of development and operations for 3 years, and then felt like I needed to go back and wanted to go back and get my finish up my master's degree at the seminary here. So quit my job. Kind of took a leap of faith and went back and did that. And while I was doing that, I worked as a behavioral specialist at an alternative school in Mansfield. So I've done so many different things. It's kind of been pretty neat. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I hope so.
No, it is.
For sure. You said it right about a journey, right? Yeah.
Zeb, do you have any questions?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's super, super interesting, right? I think all those different kind of career path choices and that road, right? It's interesting how life is very rarely like a highway, right? It's usually a section of intersecting roads that eventually lead to the same destination often, right? Yeah, so
never linear, right? So I tell students, I tell people all the time, it's never linear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then just like, I know I asked this kind of about your education previously, and I'm going to kind of ask it again about specifically, I think, applied theology, because I think this is kind of one of the main purposes of, at least from my point of view or understanding about applied theology, is you wake up in the morning, right? How has this degree, the knowledge you've attained, and the understanding of how it should be applied really kind of oriented your new or changed your perspective on life?
Well, I think I learned some things about spiritual direction and about sort of some practices, some spiritual practices while I was at seminary that have been, when I returned to them and I allowed them to speak into me, they've been very formative in the last 5 years, in particular, but in the last few. And whether that's meditation on a daily basis when I set my time to do that and I get up early to do it, whether it's eliminating noise, whether it's prayer, whatever it is, I think there's been some spiritual practices like that I've sort of incorporated from seminary into my life, and I really try very hard to view people, to be curious and not judgmental, right? To steal a Ted Lasso line, I want to make sure that I remember that everybody has a story. And everybody's coming from somewhere. While it's easy to judge, it's easy for all of us to judge people and say, well, what the heck's wrong with that person? Why are they, why don't they see this? But I try really hard to remember, to be curious and not judgmental and ask a lot of questions of students when they come in. I think when you talk about what we do in our office, like, I think, resumes and cover letters, there's a lot of easier ways to get those things. There's a lot of ways to get those done, right? There's no one way to do these things. There's best practices. I view what I learned in applied theology and Bible at the seminary as a way to try to pull out the best out of the students that come into my office and try to get them to think about what their life looks like 5-10 years from now, and how these decisions that they're trying to figure out right now, how those might impact that and what they want to see their life look like. Because, I think there's 4 pillars to what I talk about a lot when I give workshops or I talk with students, and it's find something that you love to do, find something you're good at, find something that you can make money at because you have to pay the bills, and find something where there's a need, right? So like those 4 things, something you love, something you're good at, something that you can make some money at, enough to survive, and then something that the world needs. Those 4 things, like what else do you need to figure out what's the best fit for you? Because I don't think anybody, along those theology lines, I think it's very rare for anybody to be called into one thing. We talk about calling a lot, whether it's at seminary or even in our office here, right? The Career Center for Life Calling. It's a big phrase, and sometimes it intimidates people. But to me, people, we all have a calling, and it's probably a little bit different, right? But I don't think it's necessarily to be a professor or to be a broadcaster or a coach, right? We're called to use the gifts that we each have in whatever way possible and wherever we are. And I think, whether you believe in God, Allah, whatever it is, I think these higher powers, I think God wants us to be happy. That doesn't mean everything's going to be health and wealth gospel. I don't mean it like that by any means. I think God wants us to have joy in what we do every day, whether that's as a professor, whether that's as a maintenance guy, whether that's as a truck driver, whether that's as a broadcaster, a student, head of the writing center.
Well, that was a really difficult question. Thank you for answering it.
I might have started preaching that for a minute, but
No. I mean, it is a hard question to answer, and I appreciate your response. So Zeb will be asking the harder questions. I'm just going to ask the simpler ones.
Right.
So, as I understand it, I think you're the main life calling career coach right now, right?
I mean, that's my main role. All of our full-time folks here do coaching, but that's my main role, and I have the most ability and appointments. Yeah.
What's a typical day like for you in this role?
That's a good question too. I think I have anywhere between 4 to 6 coaching appointments available every day. Generally, I will do, depending on the week and depending on the kind of flow of the semester, I'm usually giving a workshop or two every week or two, whether that's to like the Computer Science Club, asking for, hey, could you come talk to us about resumes? It's a couple weeks ago I worked with the PRSSA group up here to talk through just cover letters. They just wanted to talk about cover letters. So those are part of it. We try really hard to partner with athletics as well. Again, it's more than 50% of our population. So they're a focus point for us right now and partially, like everybody on campus in every university, it's about retention, right? And so we want to make sure that our students know what we're here for. And it's not just to retain them, just to retain them. It's because we want them to be successful and for their experience to be a positive one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do students make appointments with you, Brandon? Like,
good question.
Show up? Is there like a web page online?
Yeah. You can go to the Career Center for Life Callings page on Ashland.edu. You can email our front admin assistant at cclc-au@ashland.edu. That's a lot, and people are like, "What?" If you're listening to this, you're like, If you Google the Career Center for Life Calling, you're going to find us. But we use Handshake as our main platform for scheduling, and Handshake is what a lot of folks use throughout the country. And everybody, once you're an Ashland University student, you automatically have an account, and you can find us, and you can schedule 30-minute appointments with any of the four of us. And so, if you're more comfortable, we have two ladies who work here as well. If you're more comfortable, it just sort of depends, on your availability, and we try to kind of weave our availability throughout the day and throughout the week so that there's opportunities for folks. Those appointments, sometimes people will ask about drop-ins. We have some limited drop-in times where our student ambassadors, which are student workers here in our office, that we've trained to help them with some of the basic things. So if somebody comes in and says, "Hey, how does this look? I need to turn this in today," right? They can walk them through a couple basic things and or say, you probably need to make an appointment, if there's some available. But usually appointments are about, you have to schedule them 24 hours out so that we can then schedule other things based on, our own availability.
Very good. Zeb, have you used the service yet?
Not yet. The Ashbrook program as not just as an aside. I think they kind of have something similar integrated into it. And just because I'm, just there more often, it's just a bit more accessible for me personally. But I know lots of people in my fraternity or on campus in general that have used it, and they've had, great results and really enjoyed the time and really enjoyed your help. So.
Well, it's hard. The hard part is, like I said, there's not one way to do resumes and cover letters and those kinds of things. And everybody has thoughts and opinions on what might look best. And honestly, the best piece of advice with those things that we're giving folks right now is they need to be tailored towards each position that you're going for. So, I tell people all the time, look, put your resume up or put your cover letter up on one screen or half the screen, put the job description up on the other, and make sure you're hitting as many of those bullet points and those qualifications as possible, because so often, especially with bigger companies now, these things are, our resumes and applications are going through applicant tracking systems or an ATS. And so you make sure that you're hitting that minimum amount of whatever their barrier or bar is for folks to get even to a human. So that's part of the thing. AI, boy, I don't know about you guys, but AI has just been a fascinating, fast track development in our world as well.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really good point. I'm sure there's a lot that we can all learn from you and from the center. So, Brandon, you've done a lot in education, media, leadership. Let me ask you this. Why do you think communication is such a big deal in building a career or connecting with others, even in academia?
Well, I think if you don't communicate well, and you don't control your own message and your own narrative of who you are and what you bring to the table, you're going to get left behind. And I think Brene Brown says, clear is kind. So it might be tough. It might be a tough message you have to deliver. It might be, telling somebody that, hey, look, your resume is not ready to go. Like, this needs a lot of work. And you can do it in a kind way as well. Like, that's the thing, right? But I think communication, when we talk about leadership, whether that's coaching or running a writing center or being an up-and-coming student in Ashbrook, right? I think there's two things that I always sort of harp on with folks about leadership. And one is communication. You have to be the best communicator you can, and that means clear, direct, kind, appropriate. And that's a whole different podcast, right, just to talk about that. But I think that and emotional IQ kind of go hand in hand. So those two things, you need to be able to read the room. And so if I have a student come in and I can tell there's something like, you can tell usually if you're trying as a human, right? Let's first backtrack and say, like, look, this is just another human being that's coming into my office. I need to read the room and see, like, all right, am I here? Is this person here in a state where, like, we can really dive into this mock interview or a cover letter work or resume or big picture career coaching, or do I need to ask them something else about what's going on? And now I'm not a trained counselor, but I also know that as, like, you can tell and read the room to sort of see every time somebody comes in. Like, that nonverbal communication is such a big part of that communication. But I need to be able to communicate with people that are athletes, with people that are non-athletes. I need to be able to communicate with professors. I need to be able to communicate well with administrators. I need to be able to communicate with parents, because we talk with potential students that are recruits, whether that's athletics or just in admissions, regular, students that are coming here and visiting. And you can do that with some energy, right? I always tell people when they come in, like, man, you don't need to be somebody you're not. Right? It's one of the things I always say, be yourself, but people want to know that you care about them, right? Because if they, like, students don't care what you know until they know that you care about them, right? So they don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that might sound like a cliche, but I believe that one. Sometimes cliches are true. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Communication, I think, is the backbone of being able to achieve whatever goals you set for yourself. So without effective communication, it's hard to get there, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm doing a lot of talking today, right, because I'm the guest. But what I have learned with communication is that it really is so much about listening. And I think, that was one of the biggest things I learned at seminary and getting my master's degree, was to listen. It's really hard, right? I mean, but it's the biggest, most important part is active listening. And I think we've all probably worked for people that aren't great listeners at some point in our careers, or we've had a professor that wasn't a great listener, or a parent or a sibling, or maybe we're just not that good at it. But it is something that if you concentrate on, you can improve on.
Very good. Words of wisdom right there. So, Brandon, when you're not working, what do you like to do for fun? And you mentioned earlier basketball.
Yeah, I mean, look, I broadcast Ashland Narrows boys and girls basketball games. That's, look, if I could do one, if I were able to broadcast full time, I'll be honest, that's what I would be doing, right? Like, I love helping students for sure here, but right now, I would love to broadcast or coach again. But what do I'm in a band. I play music. I taught myself how to play the guitar. That's a lot of fun. I've got 3 kids, and one who's a freshman here, and then a junior in high school, and an 8th grader. So, I play in worship bands sometime at church. I'm busy, but it's all good things. It's all good things. My wife has tried to tell me, you got to stop saying yes to things. So that's one thing I've tried to listen to and working hard at.
Tell us about the band, Brandon.
Oh, well, I'm a member of a band we're called Low E, and that's sort of a double entendre of low E, the musical note, but also low E because we're a bunch of middle-aged guys, and so we say it's like low expectations, right? That's sort of the way it kind of came across. And I think we've been at different times, we've had some different members in our group, and it's sort of a fraternity-like group, where we all lean on each other, we all care for each other. The music is secondary to the friendship, and there's been a lot of lessons in growing amongst all of us. Really, it's a lot of fun. We play locally. We play a couple times at South Street here in town. We played Foundation Plaza, and we've gotten to play some fun gigs. We played at AU's Homecoming a couple years ago, which was really fun. I got to meet and introduce and bring up Katie Najet, now Katie Moon, our gold medalist. So that was pretty neat. But yeah, we got to do some awesome things. It's been really fun. It's not something that I ever thought I would get into, but my wife bought me a guitar about 15 years ago, and
Wow.
And I just I talked about it, and here we are playing music. I've got a single out on Apple Music and Spotify. People can find it's under.
I was gonna mention that you're pretty famous.
Which is how when I play single, I go by Davis Wells as like my stage name or whatever, and that is it's called Long Winter, which it was a lot of fun to put together and get it professionally produced. And Dr. Rob Poole, who is our VP of Student Affairs here at Ashland University, he played drums on that and did some of the backup harmonies on the vocals. So yeah, pretty cool.
He's on your band too, right?
He is, yeah. We call him Dr. Sticks. I said he's the most educated drummer I think in the world. He's got a PhD. I don't think you're gonna find many drummers. I will say drummers because most of them are crazy. He's the most educated drummer you're gonna. I think the star doesn't have a PhD. I'm pretty sure.
That's interesting. And Zab is quite the artist as well. He does a lot of drawing and I think painting as well. Zab, right?
I used to. I've kind of haven't had a lot of time to get back into it, but yeah, I used to do some oil painting and some like draftsman stuff and stuff like
Do you
that.
play
I didn't
instruments?
publish a song though. That's pretty cool. That's awesome. That's amazing.
Don't give those things up, man, because it's a completely different part of your brain. And that, like, I don't know what you guys do on the side from, outside of your regular, student and work here. But man, when I pick up a guitar and play music or try to write music and write songs, it's just such a different part of than the rest of my life. That it really is cathartic. It really is a whole different way for me to sort of kind of go into this just different mode where everything else goes away. And then that, I'm sure it's like that for painting. I'm not sure, from seeing what you have, but I hope you have something. If not, it's never too late to find something.
You know what? I find it fascinating actually to produce music. I wish I could play any instruments. Unfortunately, I don't know. I can't.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to persuade my daughters to pick up an instrument and learn it, but it's been a struggle. But I completely understand what you're saying. I get that.
Yeah.
You're just amazing. Just like the fact that you can actually produce something, especially if other people are involved and you're putting everything together. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, it's vulnerable, and I think that's you have to put yourself out there, and that's the same thing in the job field, same thing in life, man. If you don't put yourself out there, you're gonna have a hard time finding a spouse. You're gonna have a hard time finding joy. You're just gonna have a hard time enjoying your life, right? And so, I am one who will never be accused of not putting myself out there and being authentic. Sometimes to a fault, right? And I think it's hurt me sometimes, but you take the good with the bad, and I'm fortunate to be married to somebody also who's a fantastic writer and very vulnerable, and her and I like to write lyrics together, and we co-wrote that song, and we've written a bunch of other things that hopefully we'll get in the studio and record. So we'll see.
It's wonderful. Wow, it's
Yeah.
amazing, incredible. So let me ask you about Ashland University, and feel free not to answer the question if
Okay.
you want to just skip it. Um, what do you find unique about AU, or what's the best part of working with students at Ashland?
I think every school is unique, and every context is probably a little bit different. And Ashland, I think Ashland has that ability to sort of be, we're not Ohio State, right? We're never going to be a big boy. but we're not tiny. I think we have a sweet spot, and I say this to students in admissions, and it might sound salesy, but I think we have a nice sweet spot in the middle. And I think, we don't force students to go to chapel. We don't force students to do things that maybe they're not comfortable with. They can opt into all kinds of things, whether that's spiritual life on campus or clubs. But not everybody's going to know your business, but you're going to see familiar faces all the time. So for me, to be honest, when I was coming out of high school in 1995, and I was out of a Christian high school in Summit County, I didn't even know Ashland existed. There was they didn't come to our school to recruit our students, which is interesting now thinking back as somebody in higher ed. I don't know why they didn't 30 years ago, but if they had, it definitely would have been on my radar. And so I think we do have a nice sweet spot right in the middle. Yeah, I hope that answers that question, because I think that's the truth. No school's perfect. I tell students all the time, there's no such thing as a perfect school. There's no such thing as a perfect job. There's no such thing as a perfect spouse. So you have to figure out what it is that you love enough that you can tolerate, right, the things that you don't. And that's the same thing with picking a spouse. It's the same thing with picking a job, right? It's the same thing with the university. Yeah.
Right. Well said. So what are some of the most important lessons you try to pass on to young people, or your freshmen or sophomores?
I think for students that are unsure still about what they want to do, I think the biggest piece of advice I give them, and to our incoming potential students, is to find people that you can shadow. I think shadowing is one of the best pieces of wisdom that I can share with people, to say, look, if you're not sure what you want to do, I didn't know what it would look like, or you don't really know what it's going to look like to be an accountant, right? To be to work on a political campaign, to work in the music industry, to work in the broadcast industry, to be a professor, to be a teacher. The best thing I think students can do is go spend a day with multiple different people in different fields to see, because I think that's going to eliminate a lot of those situations where somebody comes to school, they spend 4 years or 4.5, whatever, or 3 years if it's a CCP student, right, quite often,
right.
Which we're seeing more and more of. And then all of a sudden you're 21, 22, you're 6 months into a job, and you're like, I hate this. This isn't what I thought it was, right? So, we don't want that. Your parents don't want that. Nobody wants that to happen. And so I think the best piece of wisdom I feel like I'm giving students constantly, other than talking about identity not being in our jobs, right? I think the best piece of wisdom that I can share with folks is to find some folks to shadow. And that can be people you know directly that are either family friends or family, or you may have to cold call / email people and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm a freshman here, I'm interested in going into nursing. Could I come and spend an hour or two just sort of shadowing and seeing what this is like? And that's where I tell students also, hey, go on AI, go on ChatGPT and say, give me 20 questions to ask a shadowing experience of a nurse, because you don't even know what questions to ask, right? You don't know what. So that's where you can really utilize AI, and I try to tell students that all the time.
Interesting. That's really fascinating. The fact that you're embracing that and sharing those skills and strategies with students.
It's an honor to work with students. I mean, it's fun. It's the best part of my day is when students come in here and they have a problem. I know that's terrible for them, but for me, I love to solve problems and help people figure out, all right, how do I coach them from here to there? And it's that sports background for me. I think that coaching background for me that kind of parlays into that.
Well, Zep can attest to this. I think a lot of times here as well at the WCC, we're very happy to sit down with students and help them out. We won't exist if students stop coming here, right?
That's right. They need to know. You talked about our services sometimes in schools being a little hidden, or people just don't know. That again, I refer back to what I said about my time as an undergrad at Ohio U. I know there was a career center there, but I didn't know of it when I was there. I didn't. I had no clue where it was even on campus or what they could help me with. I had no idea. And really, to be fair, nobody in the journalism school there talked about it or told us about it. So, that's where we try to connect with professors. We try to connect with folks to continue to build credibility to say, hey, here's who we are, here's how we can help. We're not experts in anything, but we are, really well trained to help our students, whatever field and whatever college they're in here on campus.
Absolutely. I think it's a continuous outreach.
Yeah.
And this what we do here all the time, talking to faculty in college meetings, going to classes, talking to students or having information tables in different buildings and trying to promote our services. And I think also part of this podcast is actually to advertise other services that otherwise students might not know about. So.
Yeah, well, you're getting the word out. You're the evangelist of our services here on this podcast. Call you the Billy Graham of our services here on campus.
Well, also the move. I think the one thing that we haven't talked about is the move, right?
Yeah.
Move to the first. Yeah, it's kind of like new for the both of us, for both centers. What are your thoughts on that?
We're on 8th floor of Archer Library now, and I like from a facility standpoint, it's great up here. And this is the highest, tallest building in all of Ashland County. I could turn my computer, you can see just about my house out one side of this building. You can see my church out that side of the building. But the truth is, it is a challenge because we're sort of out of the traffic flow. We wanted to be housed like you guys all under student success here. Where Catherine Williams and the advisors are all on the 7th floor, and Dr. J and all is nearby. But I think the challenge is now being on the 8th floor. Sometimes you're a little bit out of sight, out of mind. So it is a constant refreshing and telling folks every year now. I think, and every so often, even that hey, we're here, we are here, we are here. So yeah.
Yeah, that's always part of the agenda. Yeah, always. It will always be the case. So just saying.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was really insightful, and it's great to get to know you. I don't think we've ever really met in person, but this has been really good. I'll try to stop by the Career Center and get some advice, so I could use it.
Come on by, man. We'll have a cup of coffee. We'll sit and chat. Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing your advice, your passion with us today. We are incredibly grateful to have had the chance to learn from you. And of course, a big thank you to my co-host, Zeb, for making this conversation even more engaging. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the WoW podcast, where curiosity meets inspiration. Brought to you by the Writing and Communication Center at Ashland University.